If you're studying the poem La Belle sans Merci, well, lucky you. It's a fantastic story. It's got some really interesting ideas in it deployed by Keats, and there are some great language devices to get your teeth into as well. So let's start at the beginning. La Belle sans Merci is a ballad, and ballads are narrative poems, which means they tell a story. And the story which Keats creates is in the form of a medieval romance. We have a knight, kings, princes, mystical enchantress, and magic, all tied into one poem, which can perhaps best be summed up as being thematically concerned with the destructive power of love. The poem uses two separate narrative voices. The first is an unknown speaker who has discovered a knight wandering aimlessly about an autumnal landscape and questions him about his condition. And this happens in the first three stanzas of the poem. The second voice that we hear is the knight's reply, and this takes up the remainder of the rest of the poem as he narrates how he came to be in this near-death state. So let's have a look at the first three stanzas. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full and the harvest's done. I see a lily on thy brow with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. So what have we got in this first section of the poem? Well, we have a knight, and he is a knight who appears ready for battle. He is a knight at arms. And yet, curiously, when he is discovered, he appears to be close to death. He is pale, and he is haggard, and he is woe-begone. And in the third stanza of the poem, Keats uses a couple of metaphors to further illustrate the knight's condition. He's described as having a lily on thy brow, and lilies are usually found as white, which links to that pale and ghostly sense of the knight's condition. We also have another flower metaphor being used, a fading rose, and of course roses traditionally are red, and so again we have that sense of the blood draining from the face of the knight. Now this sense of the life leaving the knight is mirrored in the landscape. It's a clever structural device that Keats uses. We see in the first three stanzas that the sedge has withered from the lake, the birds have flown south, and the squirrel is preparing for winter. And all of these images or metaphors combine to give us a sense that life is not only being drained away from the knight, but it's also being drained out of nature as well. The question which the speaker asks twice in this part of the poem is, oh, what can ail thee? In other words, what is wrong with you? And it is the answer to this question which makes up the rest of the poem. The first thing that the knight tells us is that he met a lady. He describes her as being very beautiful, but there are also early clues in the poem that there is something unearthly about her. She's described as a fairy's child, and she has wild eyes. The knight then goes on to explain how he made a garland for her head and bracelets too. Now, both of these are circular objects in the same form as a wedding ring, and this has led some people to interpret this part of the narrative as the knight striving for some sort of control or power over this lady. He wants to own her as his own possession. And this can be supported by glancing at the first word of the first three stanzas of the Night Story. Look, I, it's all about him and what he did. One of these actions is to place the girl on his horse, and it's here that we see the first suggestion of an enchantment taking place. He recalls how she sang to him a fairy song, and how he looked at nothing else all day, as if he were under some sort of spell or enchantment. The next three stanzas of the poem describe how the knight was given heavenly food. Look, we've got roots of relish sweet, wild honey, and manna dew, food from heaven. He is then spoken to in this strange language, and eventually he is lulled to sleep. But look now at how the power has shifted from earlier in the poem. Look, we've now got she, and their she. And this all is a record of a knight who is now a passive recipient of the girl's actions. She speaks, she weeps, she sighs, but we are led to believe that this is all part of the enchantment which will ultimately destroy him. It's after the knight is lulled to sleep and he experiences this dream or nightmare that perhaps the deeper meaning behind the poem is developed. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle sans Merci hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam with horrid warning gaped wide, and I woke and found myself here on the cold hill's side. Now, here we learn that the knight was far from being the first person to suffer this fate. He sees men of power in this nightmare, kings, princes, warriors, all of whom have fallen under the same mysterious spell. And they call out to him in pitiful warning, but it is already too late. The nightmare reaches its peak as the knight almost becomes enveloped, horrid warning gaped wide. The wasted lips and gaping mouths of the other victims who call out to him. And then suddenly he's awake. The lady's gone, and the knight is as wasted and close to death as those whom he dreamt about. The poem has a cyclical structure, which means it sort of ends where it begins, with the knight alone, pale, and wandering aimlessly in a barren, lifeless landscape that he appears unable to escape from.